There is a certain kind of yard that stops people in their tracks, not the yard with the elaborate water feature or the professionally installed hardscaping. The yard that stops people has something most yards do not: plants that look like they cost a fortune. Plants with presence, structure, and visual weight that make the whole property feel considered and intentional. And the secret most garden centers will never tell anyone is that the plants creating that impression are almost never the expensive ones. They are the plants that cost $3 and $5 and $8 that most people walk past without a second look, and that turn into something spectacular the moment they go in the ground. 13 plants are on this list. Every one of them is available at garden centers across America right now. Every one of them costs less than most people spend on a lunch, and every one of them has the visual impact, the presence, the structure, the seasonal drama that makes neighbors stop and ask. Make sure to stay until the very end of this list, because the 13th plant is one that creates such an extraordinary statement in the landscape that most people assume it costs hundreds of dollars per specimen. The truth about what it actually costs will change the way the yard looks this season. Plant 1. Ornamental grass, the movement that money cannot. There is something that ornamental grasses do in a garden that no other plant can replicate, and it is the quality that makes them look expensive even when they cost almost nothing. They move, not in the stiff, reluctant way that a shrub sways in a strong wind, but in a continuous, fluid, responsive way that makes the garden feel alive in every breeze. The fine-textured blades catch the light differently at every hour of the day: bright silver in the morning, gold in the afternoon, a warm bronze glow at sunset. And in the wind, a mature clump of ornamental grass creates a visual animation that landscape architects spend considerable money trying to replicate with fountains and other water features. The grass does it for free, with $5 of plant material and a patch of ground. Smart gardeners know that ornamental grasses create the kind of layered, designed look in a landscape that most people associate with professional installation. A single clump of Miscanthus sinensis morning light, its silver-edged blades catching every shift in light, creates a focal point that draws the eye and anchors the planting around it the way an expensive sculpture would. A mass planting of Carl Förster feather reed grass along a fence line creates vertical structure and movement that looks like it was planned by someone with serious design credentials. The neighbors who stop and ask are asking about plants that cost under $10 each and required nothing more than planting and stepping back. Once established, ornamental grasses handle drought, heat, poor soil, and neglect with complete indifference. They come back every spring a little larger and more spectacular, earning the visual space they occupy through every season. In fall, the seed heads catch the low, slanting light in a way that makes the garden feel genuinely beautiful. In winter, the standing structure gives the yard presence when everything else has gone dormant. Plant 2. Allium, the purple globe. That stops traffic allium is the plant that makes garden visitors immediately demand to know what it is, and the answer, that it is essentially a flowering onion. Available for a few dollars per bulb at any garden center in fall, consistently produces disbelief. The perfectly spherical purple flower heads that rise on tall, bare stems in late spring look like something from a botanical garden or a high-end floral arrangement, not like a plant that costs less than a cup of coffee. The combination of the architectural stem, the perfectly round bloom, and the vivid purple color creates a visual statement so distinctive and so unusual in the residential landscape that it reads as sophisticated, curated, and expensive simply because it looks like nothing else in the garden. What makes allium particularly valuable in the landscape is the way it combines with other plants, rising above the fading foliage of spring bulbs, floating over the emerging new growth of perennials, punctuating a bed of low ground covers with vertical exclamation points of purple. Allium creates the layered, considered look that garden designers charge significant fees to achieve. The bare stem that seems like it should be a weakness becomes an asset, creating an airy transparency that allows the plants behind and below to remain visible, while the purple globes command attention at eye level. It is a design trick that costs a few dollars per bulb and delivers years of return, because established allium clumps naturalize and expand, producing more flowers every season without any intervention. After the flowers finish, the dried seed heads hold their architectural form through summer and into fall, as beautiful as the fresh flowers catching light like botanical sculpture. Plant allium bulbs in fall in any sunny, well-drained location, and wait for the spring display that will have every neighbor asking. Plant 3, foxglove, the cottage drama that costs almost nothing. Foxglove, Digitalis purpurea, is one of those plants that creates an immediate impression of a serious, considered invested garden, and it does it for almost nothing. The tall flower spikes that rise to 4, 5, and sometimes 6 feet in late spring, covered in pendant tubular blooms in shades of purple, pink, white, and cream with spotted throats, look like something from the English cottage gardens that have inspired American gardeners for generations. In the landscape, a cluster of foxgloves in full bloom creates vertical drama that is difficult to achieve with any other plant at any price point. The scale of the flowers, the height of the spikes, and the intricate spotted interior of each bloom combine into a display that looks like the result of significant horticultural effort and expense. The reality is almost embarrassingly simple. Foxglove is a biennial. It produces foliage the first year and flowers the second. And once it is established in a garden, it self-seeds so reliably that it effectively becomes a permanent resident without any replanting effort. The seeds that fall from one generation of plants germinate in the surrounding soil and produce the next generation, which blooms the following year, which produces the next generation of seeds. A gardener who plants foxglove once and then leaves the seed heads to disperse naturally has initiated a self-perpetuating cycle that will fill the garden with those spectacular flower spikes every year indefinitely. The cost of the original plants, typically a few dollars, each at the garden center, is effectively a one-time investment in a permanent annual display for a shaded and partly shaded areas where impressive floral displays are hardest to achieve. Foxglove is particularly valuable, thriving under deciduous trees in morning sun and afternoon shade, in bright indirect light, where most dramatic flowering plants fail. Plant 4, catmint, the silver blue cloud that never quits. The first time most people see a mature catmint planting in full bloom, they assume they are looking at an expensive specialty plant, something sourced from a botanical garden or a high-end nursery with a price tag to match. The reality is that catmint, Nepeta X Fascinae, is one of the most widely available and least expensive perennials in American garden centers, and the lavender blue cloud of bloom it produces from late spring through summer, combined with the silver-gray foliage that remains beautiful even between bloom periods, creates a landscape effect that looks far more sophisticated and expensive than the modest price tag suggests. What makes catmint look expensive in the landscape is the combination of qualities that individually would make it a good plant, and together make it extraordinary. The silver-gray foliage provides a cool, restrained presence in the garden that makes everything planted near it look more considered. It functions as a natural companion to roses, to ornamental grasses, to bold-colored perennials, softening and unifying the planting in the way that expensive filler plants and professional arrangements do. The lavender blue bloom color is one of the most useful in the garden palette, complementing warm oranges and yellows, echoing the blues of distant sky and water, reading from a distance as the sophisticated color choice of someone who understands plant combinations. A plant that looks this intentional, this expensive, typically requires significant maintenance. Catmint requires almost none. It handles drought, heat, and root competition, and rewards the single task of cutting back after the first bloom flush with a second wave of midsummer flowers at the exact moment when most gardens start looking tired. It performs this way year after year, getting larger and more beautiful each season. Here is the moment in this list to pause and say something directly to the gardeners watching this video who have wanted a beautiful yard for years but have held back because they assumed that beautiful meant expensive. It does not. Every plant on this list costs less than a dinner out. Every one of them creates a visual impression in the landscape that most people associate with significant investment. The difference between the yard that stops people and the yard that does not is almost never the budget. It is the plant choices. Drop a U.S. state or hardiness zone in the comments right now, because gardeners in the same region are watching this video and making the same decisions, and what works beautifully in one Zone 7 garden almost always works in another. Plant 5, Russian Sage, the silver and blue statement. Russian Sage, Perovskia atriplicifolia, is the plant that professional landscape designers specify in their most visible and most expensive projects, and it is available at American garden centers for under $5. The combination of silver stems, silver-gray aromatic foliage, and the lavender-blue flower clouds that appear in midsummer and persist through fall creates a visual signature so distinctive and so beautiful that it reads as the deliberate choice of someone with serious design knowledge. In the landscape, a mature Russian sage planting, those arching silver stems topped with hazy blue flowers, moving constantly in any breeze, creates a romantic, atmospheric beauty that looks like the result of sophisticated plant selection and careful curation. The presence that Russian sage creates in the landscape is partly about the color combination, the silver and blue that looks expensive in every context, from interior design to fashion to garden design, and partly about the scale. A mature plant reaches 4 to 5 feet tall and nearly as wide, creating a substantial architectural presence that smaller perennials cannot match. In the back of a mixed border, it creates a backdrop that makes every other plant in front of it look more considered. At the corner of a foundation planting, it creates a focal point that commands attention from the street. Used in mass, it creates the kind of sweeping, romantic landscape statement that most homeowners see only in botanical gardens and assume requires professional maintenance to achieve. Once established, Russian sage needs essentially nothing. The single annual task of cutting stems back to 12 inches in late winter takes minutes and sets the plant up for another season of independent performance. Maximum visual impact, minimum ongoing effort. Plant 6, Cone Flower, the wildlife garden that looks designed echinacea. Purpurea has something that most ornamental plants lack entirely. It looks beautiful to human eyes, and it functions as critical habitat and food source for the wildlife that makes a garden feel genuinely alive. The pink-purple flowers that open in midsummer attract butterflies in numbers that make the garden feel dynamic and animated in a way that static flower displays never achieve. The orange-bronze seed cones that develop as the flowers fade bring goldfinches, housefinches, and chickadees in winter, and the overall impression of a garden that is simultaneously beautiful and ecologically purposeful is precisely the impression that the most sophisticated contemporary garden design aims for and that most homeowners assume requires expert knowledge and significant investment to create. Smart gardeners know that a mass planting of echinacea in peak summer bloom, covered in butterflies and bees, with the warm golden afternoon light catching the orange cone centers, that scene looks like the result of serious horticultural intention. It looks curated. It looks like someone who knows what they are doing made deliberate choices about this garden. The reality is that echinacea is one of the easiest, most self-sufficient perennials available in American horticulture, asking only for sun, reasonable drainage, and the patience to leave it alone long enough to develop the taproot system that makes it genuinely self-sufficient. The plant that creates this designed impression costs $3 to $5 at the garden center and then rewards the gardener who leaves it alone with an expanding, increasingly beautiful colony that fills more of the garden with that spectacular midsummer display every season. When seed heads are left standing through winter, They disperse seeds that germinate the following spring. A planting of 6 plants becomes 12, becomes 20, filling an entire bed with that butterfly-attracting display without any replanting or additional purchase. Leave the seed head standing and let the plant do its own succession, planning. Plant 7. Bleeding Heart, the Shade Garden. Showpiece bleeding heart, Decentra spectabilis, is the plant that creates an immediate impression of a serious, sophisticated shade garden, and it does it with a flower so distinctive and so beautiful that most people who see it for the first time stop and look closely, trying to understand how a flower can be shaped exactly like a small heart, with a pendant drop hanging from its base. The arching stems covered in those perfectly formed pink or white flowers in April and May create a display that reads as something rare and precious, the kind of plant that belongs in a woodland garden designed by someone who has spent years learning what grows in shade. The reality is that bleeding heart is available at virtually every garden center in the country for a few dollars and grows with complete ease in the shaded conditions where most flowering plants struggle. The visual impact of bleeding heart in the shade garden is partly about the flower and partly about the scale. A mature clump reaches 2 to 3 feet tall and nearly as wide, creating a substantial presence in the garden that small woodland perennials cannot match. When it blooms in spring, just as the woodland garden is coming to life and before most shade perennials have reached their full size, it creates the first dramatic focal point of the season, providing the kind of visual excitement that makes the garden feel worth visiting even in the tentative early weeks of spring. The graceful arch of the flower-laden stems, the delicacy of the individual blooms, and the soft green of the foliage combine into a display that most gardeners associate with considerable horticultural skill as summer heat arrives and the plant begins to go dormant. A natural process that allows the foliage to yellow and fade. Smart gardeners have already planned for the gap it leaves. Hostas planted behind it expand to fill the space. Ferns unroll beside it to cover the fading leaves. The bleeding heart that was the star of the spring shade garden gracefully exits the stage and allows its neighbors to take over. And the gardener who planned this succession has a shade garden that looks designed and intentional through every month of the growing season. The cost of that sophisticated seasonal succession: a few dollars of bleeding heart, a few dollars of hostas, a few dollars of ferns, and the knowledge of how they work together. Plant 8. Salvia, the blue that looks like it. Costs more blue is the color that makes garden designers reach for their most expensive plant selections. Because genuinely blue flowers are rare in the ornamental plant world, and the ones that produce them tend to command premium prices. Salvia, particularly Salvia nemorosa and its cultivars, produces blue-violet flower spikes of such intensity and such duration that it looks like it should cost considerably more than the $3 to $5 it typically commands at the garden center. In the landscape, the upright purple-blue spikes rising above the neat mounding foliage create a vertical element and a color statement that reads as the considered choice of someone who understands how color works in the garden. Planted in mass, salvia creates sweeping ribbons of blue-violet that stop people on the sidewalk. The reblooming capability of modern salvia selections is the quality that makes the value proposition even more compelling. Maynight, Caradonna, and East Friesland all produce their first bloom flush in late spring, rebloom after a light cutback in early summer, and often produce a third flush in early fall, giving the garden 3 distinct periods of that extraordinary blue-violet color from a plant that asks almost nothing between those performances. The garden that has salvia in it never runs out of color in the way that gardens planted with single-season performers do, because salvia fills the gaps between the seasons of other plants with its reliable and beautiful repeat. Bloom, the investment in a few dollars of salvia produces months of blue-violet flower color that elevates everything near it. Warm. Oranges look richer against the blue, Silver ornamental grass foliage looks cooler and more sophisticated. From Zone 4 through Zone 8, it blooms, rests briefly, and blooms again every season. Plant 9, Astilbe. The feathery luxury of the shade garden. Astilbe is the plant that makes shaded gardens look genuinely luxurious, and it does it with feathery plumes of flower in colors from pure white through the palest pink to the deepest red and the most vivid purple, that create exactly the impression of considered plant selection and design expertise that most homeowners associate with expensive professional landscaping. A shaded garden with a well-chosen assortment of Astilbe varieties in full June bloom, the different heights and colors creating a layered, textured display. Looks like the result of years of knowledge and significant investment. The cost of creating that impression: a few dollars per plant, a location with consistent moisture, and the patience to let the plants establish and expand. What gives Astilbe its luxurious appearance is the texture of the flower plumes, that soft, feathery structure that catches light differently at every angle and creates a sense of depth and dimension that flat-flowered plants never achieve. In the soft, diffused light of a shaded garden, those plumes seem to glow from within, especially in the white and pale pink varieties that reflect whatever light is available with a luminous quality. The rich, dark green foliage that underlies the flowers, glossy and deeply cut in a way that looks substantial and high quality, adds another layer of visual richness that makes the entire planting feel expensive, even before a single flower opens. Astilbe rhizomes spread outward each season, producing new flowering crowns without any division effort. A planting of 6 plants becomes a colony that fills an entire bed with feathery luxury, for the cost of the original 6 plants and nothing more. Plant 10. Baptisia, the shrub. That isn't Baptisia australis creates an impression in the landscape that most plants requiring 5 to 10 years and several $100s of investment to achieve. The rounded shrub-like mound of blue-green foliage that a mature Baptisia creates, 3 to 4 feet tall and equally wide, perfectly self-supporting, covered in indigo blue flower spikes in May, looks like a small flowering shrub that has been in the ground for years and has been tended carefully by someone who knows what they are doing. The reality is that Baptisia is a perennial available for under $10 at most garden centers, and the impressive rounded form it achieves is entirely its own doing. No pruning, no shaping, no structural support, no intervention of any kind required. The indigo blue flower color that Baptisia produces in May is one of the rarest in the spring garden, that deep, saturated blue-purple that makes people stop and stare, because it does not look like something that grows naturally. The pea-like flowers cover the entire plant for 3 to 4 weeks, creating a display that looks significant and purposeful in the landscape before the interesting seed pods that follow add a second season of ornamental interest. Those inflated gray-green pods turn charcoal black in fall and rattle audibly in the breeze, providing a distinctive textural element through the autumn months and into winter, when most other plants have retreated to nothing. Once established, Baptisia handles drought, heat, and poor soil with the indifference of a prairie native. It simply grows, blooms, develops interesting seed pods, and gets larger every season without requiring anything from the gardener. It genuinely rewards neglect with better performance. Plant 11, ornamental kale and cabbage, the winter color. Nobody expects, when the last of the summer perennials has finished and the garden enters its long dormant period, ornamental kale and cabbage do something that almost nothing else in the plant world can manage. They look better as temperatures drop. The rosette forms that emerged from the soil as modest green plants begin to reveal their extraordinary color as nights turn cold. The centers flush with vivid purple, pink, white, and magenta in response to frost, deepening with every cold night until the entire plant becomes a living bouquet of color that seems almost impossibly vivid against the gray background of the late autumn garden. In December and January, when every other plant in the yard is dormant and brown, ornamental kale provides color that makes the garden look intentional and beautiful through the months when most yards offer nothing. The visual impact of ornamental kale in the fall and winter garden is completely disproportionate to its cost and its ease of culture. A container planted with 3 or 5 ornamental kale plants in October creates a display that reads as expensive and considered, the kind of seasonal display that high-end hotels and upscale commercial properties use through the winter months. In the garden, a grouping of ornamental kale at the front of a bed, where it can be seen from the street, transforms the winter curb appeal of a home in a way that no other affordable plant can match. Neighbors who have watched the summer garden perform will be surprised to see color continuing through November and December and will stop to ask what the plant is. Ornamental kale grows in the coolest months, tolerates frosts that finish most other garden plants, and costs almost nothing to plant or maintain. In mild climates, it persists through winter. In cold climates, it provides spectacular color through October and November, before hard freezes end the season. Plant 12, Black-Eyed Susan, the golden abundance there, is a moment in late July when a mature Black-Eyed Susan planting hits its peak, and the abundance of golden yellow that fills the garden at that moment is so generous and so warm that it makes the entire yard feel optimistic. Not the cautious, restrained beauty of a plant producing a few carefully placed flowers. The extravagant, overwhelming abundance of a plant that has decided to cover itself completely in golden yellow and fill every corner of its allocated space with that color from horizon to horizon of the garden bed. It is the kind of visual generosity that most people associate with expensive, intensively maintained garden displays. The reality is that Black-Eyed Susan costs $3 to $5, takes care of itself once established, and produces that extraordinary abundance without being asked. What makes Rudbeckia look expensive in the landscape is the confidence of its bloom. A plant that produces 1 or 2 flowers at a time can look tentative, like it is not quite sure of its role in the garden. Black-Eyed Susan has no such uncertainty. When it blooms completely, covering itself so thoroughly that finding a single stem without a flower in peak season requires effort. That confident, complete bloom is one of the visual signatures of a high-performance garden plants, and it creates in Black-Eyed Susan a display that looks like the product of careful cultivation and significant investment, even though it is the natural expression of a plant doing exactly what it evolved to do. The colony Black-Eyed Susan builds over seasons, spreading by rhizome and self-seeding, makes the initial modest purchase look more impressive every year. Leave the seed heads standing through winter for the birds, and watch the seedlings that emerge the following spring expand the planting further. The golden abundance of August, paid for once and renewed indefinitely. Plant 13, the one that costs almost nothing and looks like it costs everything. Ornamental grasses in fall light. This deserves its own entry at the end of this list, because the moment being described, the specific light, the specific season, the specific visual effect, is so extraordinary that it is worth waiting for. In October, when the angle of the sun drops low and the afternoon light turns golden, something happens to a mature ornamental grass planting that is genuinely difficult to describe to someone who has not witnessed it. The seed heads catch that low golden light and become luminous, not just lit from outside, but seeming to generate light from within, glowing with a warm translucence that turns an otherwise ordinary garden corner into something that looks like a painting. Visitors who happen to see a garden at this moment in this light walk away convinced they have seen something rare and expensive. They have seen a $5 plant in October afternoon light. The grasses that deliver this effect most dramatically include Carl Forster feather reed grass, whose upright golden plumes glow like torches in autumn light; Miscanthus sinensis in its many forms, whose full, arching seed heads become copper and silver in fall. Pennisetum alopecuroides, the fountain grass, whose bottle brush-like purple bronze seed heads catch the slanting October sun with an intimacy that makes each one look individually beautiful. And Panicum virgatum, the native switchgrass, whose fine seed panicles create a transparent haze of color above the plant that seems to float rather than grow. Any of these in the right October light creates a garden moment so beautiful that the cost of the plant, consistently under $10, often under $5, feels almost irrelevant. What makes this moment available to any gardener is that it requires nothing more than planting one of these grasses in a location that receives afternoon sun and then waiting for October. The grass does everything else. It grows through spring and summer with minimal care, providing structural presence and textural interest through the warmer months. It develops its seed heads through late summer, and then October arrives, the light shifts to that low golden angle, and the garden does something that all the money and all the expertise in the world cannot improve upon. Planted once, it delivers this moment every year for decades, getting more spectacular with each passing season as the clump expands and the seed head production increases. This is what $5 of plant looks like when it has been left alone to become what it was always going to be. 13 plants. 13 proof points that the yard-making neighbors stop and ask does not require a landscape budget or a professional crew. It requires the right plants, planted once and given the time to become what they were born to be. That garden is waiting in the garden center right now for almost nothing. If this video helped, hit subscribe to join this gardening community and watch the next video on screen to keep building the yard that everyone on the street will be talking about.